When sleepless nights turn into sleepless weeks, several areas of your life can be negatively impacted.
Dr. Daniel Baughn is a sleep expert, and he's here to talk about insomnia and how to beat it. So how are you? Welcome.
I'm good. Thank you so much, Java and Janelle. It's great to be here with both of you.
Yeah, this is something that a lot of people struggle with.
Absolutely.
So let's start at the beginning. Can you explain what insomnia is? Is it just one night of poor sleep? Is it multiple? What is it?
Great question. So yes, so for insomnia, it kind of typically is characterized as someone who's having difficulty sleeping, and there's 3 different ways of that, and I'll chat about that in a moment.
Okay.
And it's usually showing up for at least about a month, but typically about 3 months or longer.
Okay.
So most of us have, like, here and there sleep disruption, and that's pretty normal.
Yeah.
In fact, all of us will have, bouts of difficulty with sleeping, but when it really moves into that 3-month or longer zone, that's when it truly is a sleep disruption. And that's when it can look like there's really 3 different parts. It could look like difficulty falling asleep, or it could look like difficulty with you wake up in the middle of the night and you're not able to go back to sleep.
Okay.
Or it could look like a third type, which is really where you wake up too early. So you might wake up at 4 a.m. and be wide awake, and you're like, my day's starting, even though I'm not really wanting to start my day.
Right.
So.
And it's so frustrating because you're exhausted, you're tired, especially if you have insomnia and you haven't slept well for nights or weeks. So what's the first thing you should do if you notice this is really impacting my life?
Absolutely. So if you start to notice that you're like, gosh, my sleep quality, and that's a big one, sleep quality is starting to really go downhill. A couple key things that you really want to do are, number one, really just take stock of what's happening in your life right now. Because, we were chatting a few minutes ago, it could be a work schedule thing that might be impacting some things.
Right.
It could be a family responsibility. It could be, I mentioned earlier, so I go through bouts of insomnia myself. It could be if I stayed up too late binge watching a TV show that I'm like, I love watching.
Yeah.
So all of these things can cumulatively knock off your sleep pressure. And there's really kind of 2 key parts. There's your sleep pressure, which is this idea of your kind of, as you wake up, you're building it throughout the day. And then there's your circadian rhythm. And when those things get out of sync, that's when sleep difficulties show up for you. So if you start to notice, you're like, oh gosh, my sleep quality is kind of going downhill. I would say the first thing to really start with is to try and see what's happening for you.
Okay.
And then, if you can, try and pick a consistent wake-up time for a period of time.
Okay.
Because the more you can anchor that wake-up time for you, the more consistent you're going to let that sleep pressure build while your circadian rhythm can kind of catch up with that too.
I see. So what are your thoughts on sleep medications?
Good question. Yes. So, and I would say these are incredibly common. So they are out there all over the place.
Yeah.
I would say sleep medications do good for what they are specifically supposed to do, which is really to make you drowsy. But what we know about insomnia in particular is that it's not just a problem about drowsiness, because you can be drowsy and then still wake up a few hours later in the middle of the night and be wide awake.
Yeah.
The other real challenge with sleep medications is they're really only indicated for short-term sleep disruptions. So things like, jet lag, or there's some acute related difficulty that shows up. And the longer term, we know these medications don't really address what's causing the difficulty with your sleep, which oftentimes are our own habits, like how we're approaching, our day-to-day kind of life.
Right. Okay, so you really suggest kind of quieting your mind. And how do we do that? That's easier said than done. And I know you brought some books to kind of help with that.
Absolutely, yeah. So I've got 2 great kind of self-help books here that I recommend to anyone, but mostly to my clients if they're like, hey, what else can I read? I'm doing things like this. Or if somebody wants to just read this before they reach out and contact me, that's a great idea too.
Right.
I would say knowledge is always really helpful from this perspective. But one of the key things that you're really wanting to do to wind down your night is, if you can, you really want to try and start signaling to your mind and to your brain that bedtime is getting near.
Yeah.
And a good part of that is actually a little bit of what we call like a wind down routine.
Right.
And that wind down routine can be anywhere from like 30 minutes to an hour. I would say the key thing though truly is reducing the impact that light has on you towards the end of the day.
Right.
We live in a society that actually is starved for darkness, which is really kind of interesting, right? Because we have lighting all over the place. Our devices give off light.
Right.
We have all these things that are kind of like sending this signal to your brain to stay awake, be alert,
Right.
consume this new bit of information. when in reality, what we want to try and do is start reducing your light. So I was chatting with someone right before we came on about, these smart light bulbs these days, I think are phenomenal because you can really program them to start auto-dimming themselves.
Oh, nice.
You can program them to start changing the color. And all of these subtle cues are, again, sending signals to your mind that, hey, the end of my day is approaching. It's time for me to begin that wind-down process. So.
Does food or do drinks impact your ability to wind down and have proper sleep hygiene?
Absolutely, they can. But as always, I think it depends on what it is that you're eating. So ideally, not necessarily large meals or a lot of food kind of before bedtime. And specifically for beverages, you typically want beverages that don't have caffeine, that don't have alcohol. Alcohol has a really bit of a counterintuitive effect on sleep. It makes you drowsy, but it totally interrupts your brainwave patterns later in the night, and then you may need to wake up again to use the restroom. Both of those things combined means that it's just not a good habit to kind of be in from a sleep perspective. Because really what you're wanting is anything that involves all of your senses. So touch, sight, smell, and these can be things like, maybe you have like a candle that you light, or maybe you have like a lotion that you use, but the key is to make it just part of your bedtime routine.
Right, something you only do at night. Well, great tips. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And you can find out more information on Daniel's website at danielbaughn.com.